In the fall of 1830, Joseph Smith received two of the revelations that we're studying this week in Come Follow Me. Sections 30 and 32 of the Doctrine and Covenants were specifically given with the purpose of calling men to serve as missionaries to the West. In Section 30, Oliver Cowdery was called to lead a mission to the Lamanites, and in Section 32, Peter Whitmer Jr., Ziba Peterson, and Parley P. Pratt were called to join him. As the missionaries left New York with their carpet bags filled with copies of the Book of Mormon, they planned to stop in Northeast Ohio, where Parley P. Pratt, a very recent convert to the church, knew a Campbellite preacher by the name of Sidney Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon led a Reformed Baptist congregation in Menor, Ohio, which followed the teachings of a man named Alexander Campbell. When the missionaries first arrived, they began preaching to many people in the area. When Sidney Rigdon learned that 17 members of his congregation had been baptized, he was upset. He allowed the missionaries to preach in his own church and gave space for them to teach to his congregation. In that meeting, he told everyone that the things that had been taught were serious and that they should take the time to contemplate them carefully and to consider whether they were of God. Sidney himself was not yet convinced. On November 7, 1830, a meeting was called for in Mayfield, Ohio, at the home of John and Sarah Jackson, near the Chagrin River where I'm standing now. That evening, he read from the Book of Mormon. He shared the account in 3rd Nephi of Jesus coming to the Nephites at the temple in Bountiful. He testified that this was a fulfillment of ancient prophecies that Jesus would go to other sheep. At the conclusion of his remarks, Parley opened the meeting to others who wanted to share. Sidney stood. He shared that for much of his life, he had tried to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. He felt after hearing Parley preach that he had not yet had that ability. He said that he would no longer share the gospel until he could share the restored gospel of Jesus Christ as one with authority to do so. At the conclusion of the meeting, many of them came here to the banks of the Chagrin River, and somewhere nearby, they were baptized, including Sidney and his wife Phoebe Rigdon. Shortly after this, Sidney and another man who had been a member of his congregation named Edward Partridge decided that they needed to meet the prophet Joseph Smith. They traveled hundreds of miles together to meet Joseph in Manchester, New York. When they met with him, Joseph received two additional revelations, sections 35 and 36 of the Doctrine and Covenants. In section 35, specifically to Sidney Rigdon, he is taught by the Lord that he will have the opportunity to baptize people by authority and to lay hands on them to give them the gift of the Holy Ghost, and that through those people, many will be blessed. In section 36, Edward Partridge, who had not yet been baptized, is told that his sins are forgiven him and he's commanded to preach the gospel. Eventually, Sidney would baptize Edward and lay hands on him and give him the gift of the Holy Ghost. Edward would then come to be called as the first bishop of the church, thus fulfilling the promise that the Lord had made to Sidney in section 35.